Rachel worked the cafeteria line at Lincoln High School, serving meals with a warm smile, despite her own empty kitchen cabinets at home. Her $14 per hour wage barely covered rent, yet every day she quietly set aside her small tips in a jar marked Marcus College Fund. For 2 years, she watched Marcus, a brilliant student from a struggling single-parent home, stay late after school to study under dim library lights. The other lunch ladies questioned her choice to save money for someone else's child when she could barely afford her own groceries. But on graduation day, as Marcus stepped up to give his valedictorian speech, his words would reveal a truth that would change Rachel's life forever. No one in that auditorium could have guessed how a cafeteria worker's small acts of kindness would ripple through time to create something extraordinary. Hi everyone, welcome to Mystic Tales. Today I'm excited to share a new story with you. The morning sun streamed through the cafeteria windows of Lincoln High School as Rachel adjusted her hairnet and checked the temperature of the serving trays. The aroma of fresh bread filled the air while she organized her workstation. At 52, her hands showed signs of years of hard work, but her eyes remained kind and watchful. "Good morning, Marcus. The usual today?" Rachel smiled at the tall, thin boy who always arrived early. His worn backpack hung heavily with books, and his jacket had seen better days. "Yes, please, Ms. Rachel, just whatever's on the meal plan." Marcus spoke softly, sliding his meal card across the counter. Rachel noticed the card showed a free lunch status. She had seen many students on the program, but something about Marcus was different. While other students rushed through the line, he always said thank you and helped clean up dropped napkins or spills without being asked. During lunch hours, Rachel observed Marcus sitting alone, textbooks spread around his tray. Unlike other students who chatted and played on their phones, he studied between bites, making careful notes in his worn notebook. "That boy hasn't missed a single day of school in 2 years," Maria, another cafeteria worker, mentioned while they cleaned up after lunch. "His mother works 2 jobs," Rachel replied, remembering the parent-teacher conference where she had seen Marcus's mom, exhausted but proud, discussing his perfect grades with teachers. At the end of each day, Rachel counted her tips, usually between $5 and $12 from staff members who bought lunch. She pulled out an old mason jar from her locker, labeled with Marcus's name. The jar wasn't much, but it held her hope for his future. "You're crazy to save your tips for some student's college fund," Maria said one afternoon, watching Rachel add $4 to the jar. "You barely make ends meet yourself." Rachel thought about her own studio apartment, where she carefully budgeted every penny. "Sometimes, Maria, you see someone with so much potential, you just have to help. Even if it's just a little." Every morning, Rachel watched Marcus arrive early to study in the cafeteria before classes began. She started leaving a fresh apple or orange near his usual spot. He never knew where they came from, but she saw him carefully eat each one, never wasting a bite. "Thank you for breakfast, Ms. Rachel," Marcus said one morning, having figured out his mysterious benefactor. "You don't have to do that. You remind me of my brother," Rachel replied, straightening her apron. "He was smart like you but never got the chance for college. Sometimes a little help can make a big difference." Ugh, right. The jar slowly filled over months. Rachel kept it hidden in her locker, wrapped in an old dish towel. Some days she could only add $1, other days nothing at all when her own bills grew too tight. But she never touched the money she had saved, even when her old car needed repairs. "You're going to do great things, Marcus," she would say whenever she saw him studying. "Just keep working hard." What Rachel didn't know then was how these small acts of kindness would create ripples far beyond what she could imagine, leading to a moment that would change both their lives forever. Winter arrived at Lincoln High School, bringing with it new challenges. Rachel noticed Marcus's thin jacket wasn't keeping out the cold. His fingers were red and stiff as he tried to write in his notebook during breakfast. The cafeteria's warmth had become his morning sanctuary. "Marcus, could you help me sort these delivery boxes?" Rachel asked one morning. "The storage room needs organizing." "Of course, Miss Rachel," Marcus replied, putting his physics textbook aside. In the storage room, Rachel pulled out a package wrapped in brown paper. "My nephew outgrew this winter coat. It's just taking up space in my closet. Would you want it?" Marcus hesitated, his pride visible in his expression. "I don't know if I should. It would help me out, actually. No point in it sitting unused," Rachel said, understanding his reluctance to accept charity. The coat fit perfectly. Rachel saw Marcus's mother at the grocery store that weekend, working at the checkout counter. Their eyes met, and his mother gave a small nod of gratitude. One Tuesday morning, Rachel overheard Marcus talking to his guidance counselor in the cafeteria corner. "The application fees are due next week," the counselor explained. "Have you discussed it with your mother?" "She's been sick, missed some work," Marcus responded quietly. "We're behind on rent. I'll just apply to the community college instead." That evening, Rachel counted the money in her mason jar. $872 in tips, saved over 2 years. She thought about her own empty refrigerator, the electricity bill she was struggling to pay. "What's the application fee?" Rachel asked the guidance counselor the next day. $90 for the state university, Mrs. Thompson replied. "Marcus is a strong candidate for their engineering program." Rachel went to the bank during her lunch break. She placed the cash in an envelope, keeping it anonymous. Mrs. Thompson agreed to help, understanding the delicate nature of the situation. 2 days later, Marcus rushed into the cafeteria, his face bright with excitement. "Ms. Rachel, I got to submit my application. The school said they received an anonymous payment for the fee." "That's wonderful news," Rachel smiled, serving him an extra scoop of mashed potatoes. "You deserve every chance." The winter months passed slowly. Rachel continued saving her tips, though some days brought none. Her car broke down in February, but she took the bus rather than touch Marcus's college fund. She learned to layer her clothes when she couldn't afford to turn the heat up in her apartment. "You're going to make yourself sick working so hard," Maria warned one morning, noticing Rachel's tired eyes. "Sometimes being tired is worth it," Rachel replied, watching Marcus study for his final exams. "Some things matter more than comfort." The jar continued to fill, penny by penny, dollar by dollar. Each contribution represented a meal Rachel skipped, a small luxury foregone. But every time she saw Marcus's dedication, she knew her sacrifice had purpose. Spring brought college acceptance letters. One morning, Marcus walked into the cafeteria, holding an envelope from the state university, his hands trembling slightly. "Ms. Rachel," his voice was barely above a whisper, "I got in. Full academic scholarship." Rachel's eyes welled with tears as she served breakfast. "I knew you could do it, Marcus. I just knew it." But celebration was short-lived. Later that week, Marcus sat alone at his usual table, staring at another letter. "What's troubling you?" Rachel asked, wiping down nearby tables. "The scholarship covers tuition," Marcus explained, "but the housing deposit and meal plan, it's $3,000. Mom's medical bills, we just don't have it." Rachel went home that evening and counted her jar. $2,400. Not enough. She thought about her brother Tommy, who had dropped out of college because of similar expenses 20 years ago. The next morning, an elderly man in an expensive suit visited the cafeteria. Mr. Peterson, a school board member, often came for coffee. Rachel had served him for years, remembering how he liked his coffee black with 1 sugar. "The usual, Mr. Peterson?" Rachel smiled, pouring his coffee. "Thank you, Rachel." "Say, I've noticed that young man who studies here every morning. Quite dedicated." "That's Marcus. Just got a full academic scholarship to state," Rachel said proudly. "He's worked so hard for it." Mr. Peterson watched Marcus studying in the corner. "I saw him helping a freshman with math yesterday. Spent his whole lunch break explaining equations." "So Michael wanted to become a doctor?" "That's Marcus for you, always helping others," Rachel replied, thinking of her tip jar at home. "I hear there's more to the story," Mr. Peterson said quietly. Mrs. Thompson mentioned something about an anonymous application fee. Rachel's cheeks flushed. She busied herself wiping the counter. "You know, Rachel," Mr. Peterson continued, "my late wife was a cafeteria worker. Put herself through night school serving lunches. She always said kindness matters more than money." He finished his coffee in silence, left his usual tip, and walked away. Rachel noticed he'd forgotten his newspaper. Under it lay an envelope addressed to the school's guidance office. The next day, Mrs. Thompson called Marcus to her office. Rachel watched him walk past the cafeteria windows, shoulders slumped, probably expecting more bad news about finances. 10 minutes later, he ran back in, tears streaming down his face. "Mr. Rachel, someone donated the housing deposit to the guidance office. They said it was an anonymous education fund." Rachel smiled, continuing to stack lunch trays. Her own jar of tips stayed hidden at home, waiting for the right moment. She hadn't known about Mr. Peterson's wife, but somehow, kindness had found its way back around. Graduation day approached quickly. Rachel spent her morning breaks helping the other cafeteria staff decorate the gymnasium. The familiar smell of floor polish mixed with the scent of fresh flowers as parents began arriving early to claim the best seats. "You're coming to the ceremony, right?" Marcus asked during his final breakfast at school. His graduation gown hung neatly in the cafeteria office, where Rachel had pressed it for him. "Couldn't miss it," Rachel smiled, though her chest felt tight. Her jar of tips sat in her bag, wrapped carefully in tissue paper. "Your mother must be so proud. She got the day off from both jobs to be here," Marcus beamed. "First time in years." That afternoon, Rachel changed into her best dress in the staff bathroom. The blue cotton fabric was faded but clean, and she had polished her only pair of dress shoes until they shone. "You clean up nice," Maria commented, helping Rachel pin her hair. "First graduation you've attended in 10 years working here." "This one's special," Rachel replied, patting the bag containing her jar. The gymnasium filled quickly. Rachel sat in the back, watching families file in with cameras and balloons. Marcus's mother arrived in her supermarket uniform, having come straight from work. She sat alone, clutching a small bouquet of daisies. Principal Matthews began his speech, his voice echoing through the gymnasium. "Today, we celebrate not just academic achievement, but character." Rachel barely heard the words, her mind on the jar in her bag. $2,400 might not be much for college, but it could help with books or supplies. The valedictorian announcement came. "And now, our class speaker, Marcus Thompson." Marcus approached the podium, adjusting his note cards with slightly shaking hands. His voice started soft but grew stronger. "Success isn't just about grades or talent," he began. "Sometimes it's about the people who believe in you when you stop believing in yourself." Rachel watched proudly from her seat, remembering the quiet freshman who had first entered her lunch line. "There are angels among us," Marcus continued, "people who work quietly, asking nothing in return. Today, I want to tell you about one such person." Rachel shifted in her seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Every morning for 2 years, a cafeteria worker saved her tips for my college fund. She thought nobody knew. She worked extra hours, took the bus in winter, and went without, just to help a student she barely knew." Heads turned in the audience. Rachel felt her face grow warm as Marcus's words filled the gymnasium. "Ms. Rachel taught me that kindness isn't about recognition. It's about believing in someone's dreams enough to sacrifice for them." She saved $2,400 in tips, $1 at a time, while struggling to pay her own bills. Rachel froze. She had never told anyone the exact amount. Then she remembered the day Marcus had helped her clean the storage room. He must have seen the notebook where she'd tracked her savings. "Start getting ready for bed," she said. But what Miss Rachel didn't know, Marcus continued from the podium, was that Mr. Peterson, our school board member, had been watching her quiet acts of kindness all along. He saw her dedication, not just to me, but to every student who came through her line. Mr. Peterson stood up from his seat in the front row. "Rachel's dedication. reminded me of my late wife's struggle through college. When I learned about her tip jar, I contacted some fellow board members. Together, we've established the Rachel Martinez Memorial Scholarship. Rachel's hands trembled in her lap as Mr. Peterson explained further. This annual scholarship will cover housing and meal plans for one deserving student who shows exceptional character. But, more importantly, he turned toward Rachel's direction, the board has created a permanent position for a student mentor, with a salary that reflects the importance of such guidance. In case you missed the point, Marcus smiled from the podium. Ms. Rachel, would you please stand? Rachel slowly rose, her blue dress wrinkled from sitting. The tissue-wrapped jar still sat in her bag at her feet. The position is yours if you'll accept it, Mr. Peterson said. Your salary would be double your current wages with full benefits. We need more people like you guiding our students. Rachel felt Maria's supportive hand on her shoulder. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she nodded yes. And Miss Rachel, Marcus added softly, keep your tip jar. I want you to use it for yourself. You've earned it. After the ceremony, Rachel found herself surrounded by parents and students. Marcus's mother hugged her tightly. Thank you for believing in him, she whispered. Later that evening, Rachel sat in her small apartment, still in her blue dress. The jar of tips sat on her kitchen table. She carefully counted out enough to finally fix her car's heater. The next morning, she arrived early at Lincoln High School, not as a cafeteria worker, but as their new student mentor. Her first task was to set up her small office near the guidance department. On her desk, she placed an empty mason jar with a new label. Dreams Fun. Ready for your first day? Mrs. Thompson asked from the doorway. Ready, Rachel smiled, arranging a bowl of fresh fruit on her desk for any student who might need breakfast. There are more Marcuses out there, just waiting for someone to believe in them. As students began filling the hallways, Rachel thought about how life's biggest changes often start with the smallest acts of kindness. She opened her office door, ready to continue what she had started in the cafeteria line, helping students, one small gesture at a time. Loved this story? Tap that like button and subscribe to Mystic Tales for more. Let us know how this story made you feel with a single word in the comments.